Welcome to the San Mateo Arboretum Society's annual rose pruning seminar. It will last approximately 60 minutes for the lecture and demonstration, and it will be recorded. A few days after the presentation, you will be emailed a link to the recording and an evaluation form to provide feedback. For those viewing on Zoom, submit your questions by clicking on the chat box icon at the bottom of the screen. Before we start, a little information about what is happening at the Arboretum Society. Our nursery in San Mateo Central Park is open Saturdays and Sundays from noon to 3 p.m., weather permitting. Payment is by credit or debit card and Apple Pay. No cash is accepted. The nursery is staffed by volunteers and may occasionally be closed. Check our website, sanmateoarboretum.org, or call 650-579-0536, extension 2 for updated information. While you're in Central Park, visit the Rose Garden, Butterfly Hummingbird, and our Sun and Shade demonstration gardens. All are maintained by Arboretum Society volunteers. Today, we're pleased to have Arboretum Society member, Rose Garden volunteer, and rose expert Archana as today's speaker. She's been growing roses for over 25 years and believes in a practical, no-nonsense approach to rose care. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
I just want to say,
sorry.
We would appreciate if you have a mask, if you put it on. We have extra. It seems like the rates are going up, so if you have a mask, if you put it on, we have plenty.
Thank you, Pat. For those of you on Zoom, we're just taking a moment to get the in-person attendees settled in. So we'll just start in a minute.
Let me know when you want to start the slide.
Okay, yeah, actually you can pull it up. All right. So welcome everyone, those of you in the room, as well as those of you on Zoom. I appreciate you joining me today for this seminar on rose pruning. As Susan mentioned, my name is Archana. I'm a rose garden volunteer here at the San Mateo Arboretum Society. And along with an amazing group of volunteers, who many of whom are in the room, I help maintain the Central Park Rose Garden. And also, as Susan mentioned, I've been growing roses for 25 years. Yeah, more than I want to count. And I've got about 75 roses in my garden. And like many of you, I have things that get prioritized higher than my garden. And because of that, I've developed that practical, no-nonsense approach to rose garden. And with regards to rose pruning, I'll share some of those thoughts with you today. So let's just level set first. What's rose pruning? What are we going to be talking about? So it's the cutting and removal of rose canes and rose stems, typically done during the winter months. And that's because that's when rose growth slows. So think of it as, hey, the roses are slowing down in growth. That's a good time to prune. I tend to shy away from using the word dormant, which you'll read in many books on rose pruning. And that's because here in the Bay Area, many of our roses just don't go dormant. We don't have the climate where they really stop growing. So a good way to look at it, think when rose growth slows down. That's when you want to prune. Now, if you find yourself nervous at the thought of pruning, or you're wondering, how do I prune? Am I doing things the right way? Well, know that you're not alone. I'm surprised at the number of people who feel overwhelmed at the thought of rose pruning. Sorry? Oh, okay. Susan's asking me to speak louder.
Okay.
Is the sound up? Oh, you can't hear me at the back?
Yeah.
Got it. I thought it was over the Zoom. Okay, let's try this again. My projecting voice. All right. Thank you, Denise. All right. So my approach to rose gardening and what I want to have as the goal for this presentation is not to just tell you about how to prune roses, but to ease some of that rigor that somehow appears when we read or talk about rose pruning. So when we want to simplify things, we have to take a step back and not just rush into, let's start figuring out how we prune, what do we cut. Let's take a step back and understand why we prune. We'll then look at when to prune. When's a good time to prune in the Bay Area? We'll then look at the mechanics of things. How do we actually prune? What equipment do we need? Things like that. And then finally come to what to prune, and just as importantly, what not to prune. I'll do a pruning demo. I've got a planted rose here, potted rose here. I'll use that. And then we'll have some dedicated time for question and answers. But I encourage you to ask me questions as we go along the way, because when you have that thought, I'm saying something, you have that thought, voice it, others can benefit. If I happen to be talking about what you're asking in a future slide, I'll just ask you to hold on for a few moments. And for those of you on Zoom, you can ask questions via the chat feature, and our wonderful host, Kevin, will let me know when there's a question if I don't see it. All right. So remember the first part, understanding why we prune. Now, in historic and old cemeteries scattered all across California, there are roses planted at grave sites. These roses, many of which have been planted in the 1800s, the early 1900s, they've not received care for decades. Certainly no pruning done on them. And you know what? Every year they flower magnificently. So what does that tell us? It tells us that roses don't need to be pruned. We prune roses not for their benefit, but for our benefit. So if roses don't need to be pruned so that they flower better, why are we pruning? And that's two main reasons. We want to limit the size of the rose so that they fit into our gardens. Most of us don't have that extended space to grow these awesome roses that reach 10 feet by 10 feet, right? Little minivans. So we prune to fit the rose into its allotted space. And that's absolutely true for us in the Central Park Rose Garden. We want to fit as many roses in the space so the public can enjoy these different roses. We prune to fit the roses into their allotted space. And then, just as importantly, because we are gardening, right? We want everything to look as beautiful as it can. For the aesthetics, we prune to shape the rose bush. We prune to remove all the dead, decaying canes and damaged canes, all the dirty brown leaves that we see at this time of the year. That's the reason we prune. Okay. I hope it eases some of the nervousness around pruning when you realize that roses don't need it. We prune for ourselves. Okay. All right, so when to prune? Like real estate, rose gardening, and actually, gardening is all about location. And it's really important that we understand what's the right time to prune in the Bay Area. Okay, so, all right. So we live in a pretty benign climate. We don't have severe weather conditions. Roses don't tend to go dormant. They slow down in growth. And we take advantage of that period in time to do the heavy pruning. So the ideal time to prune roses in the Bay Area is the month of December or January. And what happens, you've come towards the end of January and you haven't pruned your roses, please don't freak out. You can prune as early as November, as late as well into February, and your roses will be just fine. They'll still flower when they're ready to flower in April or May. And I found this out through having to prune my roses a couple of years before Thanksgiving. And, you know, other years where, hey, life happens. And, you know, here's mid-February and I haven't pruned my roses. They all flowered in it. Okay. So, there we go. Here's something that I don't see mentioned quite often, and it's really the first time that I'm talking about it, you know, in an audience such as this. Summer pruning. I have found that roses here actually respond well to summer pruning. So not just the light deadheading that we do after, you know, we get the marvelous spring flush, but deeper pruning, very similar to what you might do in winter. And the roses respond really well. If you find in your rose garden, by July, August, your roses are looking a little tired, they're, you know, got disease on them, they're just not doing, they're not looking as happy as they looked back in April, May, consider a little bit of a deeper pruning. The only caution that I'd ask you to keep in mind is protect any canes that you've cut down from sunburn, because the sun in July, August is very different from what we have in December and January. We can prune in December and January and not worry about like covering the rose canes up. But if you prune in summer, just keep that in mind. I found that out this year, and I think I showed Susan when she was over in my garden. I had to prune down a rose in summer. I think I must have done it in August. And there was September when she was visiting, and I was surprised to see the rose just flowering, the leaves looking so fresh as if it was spring. So keep that in mind, and I'll keep you updated on this little experiment as I go, you know, along. All right. So we've learned when to prune. We've learned why we prune. Let's talk a little bit about how we prune, and under that we'll talk about equipment and safety. Roses have thorns. You didn't know that. And then we'll look at the mechanics of things, how to make cuts, the rose cuts. All right, so equipment, the first thing you'll need is a good pair of pruning shears or pruners. What you want to get is bypass pruners. So what are bypass pruners? So it's when the two blades pass each other like scissors. Those are bypass pruners, as opposed to anvil pruners, where the bottom blade holds steady and the top blade just cuts against it. The reason you don't want to use anvil pruners is because they tend to not cut as cleanly. The rose canes get squished a little bit, and you want to avoid that. But you know, frankly, if that's all you have, go ahead. The roses don't know any better. All right, so in terms of brands, Felco's, Fiskars, Coronas are all good pruners. The gold standard is Felco's, but really I think what you really want is something that you feel comfortable using, right? If you're going around pruning roses, spending, you know, a few hours, you can, up to, you know, some of those bigger roses, a few hours, you want something that's really comfortable. And if you're left-handed, please do get yourself left-handed pruners. They make all the difference. Keep your pruners clean, keep your pruners sharp. You can get little sharpeners. You can get them at Home Depot to just keep your blades sharp, or you can get them professionally sharpened. Do that at least once a year. It really makes a difference. The next thing that you might want to consider is loppers. Again, bypass loppers. They're really useful when you have those thick rose canes you want to get at. The pruners just can't do it. Get yourself the loppers. And then what's really helpful too is a pruning saw, a foldable one, or something that's safe. Very helpful in getting down to cut the base of rose canes where, you know, the loppers, you just don't have the space to maneuver them. So pruning saws comes in handy then. And like I said, roses have thorns. You are going to encounter them. Some roses are notorious for jabbing you, even if you look at them. All right. Joking apart, some are really, you know, flesh rippers. A pair of gauntlet gloves. Small gloves work, but you know, you get the extra protection along your arms, especially if you need to reach in and, you know, get through all that maze of stems. And then what's also helpful, safety glasses, especially if you're tackling a large rose or a climbing rose. Believe me, you know, you never know when something can happen. And I've had a rose cane come, you know, I had it tied up, I was pruning, I think the vines fell apart and the rose cane just whipped across, slashed me across my face, my ear, the thing, but my glasses protected my eyes. So really, safety is important. I like to keep a little Ziploc with antiseptic wipes. It's nice to be able to, if you've got multiple roses, you're going from rose to rose. It's nice to have it handy so you can wipe down your pruners as you're going along, especially if you've got a rose that, you know, a little bit more disease ridden than something else. So this comes in handy. And then this is a little vial of tincture of iodine. I really recommend keeping something like this handy. You can get it at pharmacies, online, either the bottle or wipes. There's something called rose thorn disease. And, you know, we get cuts from working with roses on occasion, sometimes a little bit more than we'd like. Just play it safe and keep something so that as soon as you get cut, you can wipe yourself down. So just, you know, some common sense stuff. Continuing with the common sense, wear thick clothing. It's always nice, jeans and a jacket. You will get snagged, they'll rip. So, you know, probably not your best pair. And shoes with thick sole. Again, like I said, common sense stuff. And have a bin or bucket handy. Number of times I've forgotten, I go back and get a bin or bucket. You know, it's just, even if it's not something that you're going to trip over those rose canes and jab yourself, you know, you might have kids around or pets, and just, again, play it safe. I like to really recommend pruning and disposing as you go, instead of, you know, getting a pile, building up, and then hauling them away. Just use the bucket or the bin. Okay. Now let's come down to a little bit of the nitty-gritty. So we've got our pruners, you're all dressed to prune. What should we prune? Where should we prune? What do we need to look out for? So let's start with something called growth buds or bud eyes. So in this picture, you see a rose cane with two swelling growth buds. These are the points at which the rose is going to send up new stems, which will end in flowers. Okay. So you want to cut 1/4 of an inch above a growth bud, and you want to choose an outward facing growth bud. So what does an outward facing growth bud mean? Well, you have the rose bush, you have all these canes, and you have these growth buds along the cane in different directions. You want to choose a growth bud that's pointing away from the bush. You don't want to direct the growth into the rose bush. You want to direct it outwards. Okay, so that's what we mean. Make a clean cut 1/4 inch above an outward facing growth bud. Okay. Now, the growth bud, when it's dormant, is called a bud eye, and it's a little bit harder to recognize because sometimes all you see is a little bulge or swelling. And in this picture, the one on top, that's pretty clear. You can see there's something coming out there. The middle one, just that little pimply-like thing. And the one below, hardly anything, but it's there. If I were to cut just above that bottom, the third one from the bottom, just above that, the rose would push growth from that little point there. Okay? It's a dormant growth bud or bud eye. Okay? So same thing, as you look around along a cane that you're planning to cut, look for these bud eyes. Yes, there's a question in the room.
So on the third lowest bud eye, do you know what direction? Do you have any sense of how the direction would be if you pruned it down there?
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. So for those of you on Zoom, the question was the third most, the bottommost bud eye. Is there any way to tell? Can we see in which direction the new growth will grow in? And the answer to that is both a yes and no. Sometimes you won't know. There's nothing. You know that that's a point where a bud eye is there, a growth bud is going to grow, but you may not know in which direction. Sometimes you'll see the faintest, literally the faintest swelling, little bit more on one side. And it's a good chance that's where that growth is going to come from. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, another question.
So if you cut below that third one on the bottom, then nothing will grow from that spot ever. Is that what that means?
Okay, so the question was, let's say we cut off that vertical cane right to the bottom. Will nothing ever grow from there? That's a great question because the answer to that is there could be a growth because that point where you have that vertical cane joining the horizontal cane, that was the point of a bud eye or a growth bud at one point. That's what grew that stem. And at one point, you can have multiple bud eyes. They're just dormant, right? So there's a good chance you cut there and you might get another stem from that point. Sometimes not, yeah. Okay, so again, when you have these bud eyes and when you do pruning, especially as you go lower down on the rose bush, you're going to have bud eyes and not growth buds. So that's what you're going to be watching out for. And the same rule applies, cut 1/4 of an inch above an outward facing bud eye, as far as you can recognize. All right, so some mechanics of it all, actually making the cut. So use your bypass pruners, make sure the blades are sharp, and you want to hold the pruners so that the cutting blade is below. So if your stem was here, and no, I won't cut off my finger, the blade needs to be below, okay? However, there you are, moving deep into the interior of a rose bush, balancing yourself, and you're trying to move your pruner so that the bottom blade is, please don't, just make the cut, stay safe, right? It's, these are guidelines, but yeah, you don't absolutely have to follow them. As I like to say, the rose will never know. All right, so how do you make the cut? So you make a clean cut, 1/4 of an inch above an outward facing bud-eye, as we've seen. And the general guideline is to slant the cut about 45 degrees, moving away from the bud-eye. So as you see in the picture, the bud-eye is on the left and the slant downwards is towards the right, and it's about 45 degrees. So hang on. Okay, let's go with this. Making the cut. I like this slide because it shows you the right way and all of the many wrong ways. And we'll come to right way and wrong way in a minute, but cane number 1 shows an incorrect cut where a pair of dull pruners was used to make the cut. Now, when you make a clean cut, the rose seals that cut fairly quickly. When you have a dull cut like that and all the rose tissue, is kind of mangled and exposed, the rose doesn't heal itself as quickly, and you just open the door for disease to kind of enter the rose cane. So avoid dull pruners, get them sharpened, and number 2, the cane number 2 shows that the cut has been made too high above the bud-eye, right? And so where should that cut have been? 1/4 of an inch above. Okay, so why is this a big deal? It's not really a big deal, but what could happen is the rose may not push nutrients beyond the bud-eye in this case. So that, let's say, inch, 2 inches, 3 inches of cane above the bud-eye is going to start dying back. And sometimes the dieback doesn't stop when it comes to that point where the bud-eye is. It's going to die further back. So, it's an annoyance. You're going to have to come back after some time and do some more pruning. So just avoid it. Some roses are notorious for dying back in the first place. You make a nice clean cut, you come back 2 weeks later and it's like already dying back. So it's just something to watch out for. All right, rose cane number 3. Do you see that sharp angle, right? And where has that bottom angle gone? It's gone below the bud-eye, right? So this is where that cut should have been and the angle of the cut, but it's way below. And just like in the previous case, this rose may decide to abort pushing nutrients to that bud-eye because a lot of, the vessels that send up the nutrients have been cut off. So the rose might stop right there. And so again, you're going to get dieback. All right, here, same thing. It's this time the angle of the cut is incorrect. It should have been, the cut should have been angled downwards away from the bud-eye. It was done the reverse. So what's the theory behind this? Why do you not want to do this? Well, the idea is that you want rainwater or dew, moisture, when it falls on the exposed cut to drain away from the bud-eye. Okay, so when you prune the wrong way, the slant coming towards the bud-eye, you're going to get water draining. All right, and number 5 shows the correct way to prune 1/4 of an inch above the bud-eye at a 45-degree angle. All right, so now let's see the practical side of things. Before you take out your protractor and go start measuring 45-degree angles, no. A horizontal cut is just fine. I mean, consider this, a horizontal cut has a smaller surface area than a slanted cut. The rose heals much faster, it's a smaller area, less area for, disease to go in. And hey, how many of the rose canes are really vertically straight up? Most of them angle. right? So if you make a horizontal cut on that angled cane, you've got an angle already, right? So again, I like to think of all of this more from, the common sense side. All of these things are great, they're guidelines, but that's what they are, right? So don't get too caught up in angles and stuff. Just go with it, make the cut. All right, same thing about an outward facing bud eye. And to your question that you'd asked earlier, right? Roses do things that they live. They're not really concerned about us. We make these pruning cuts all ever so carefully. And you know what? They'll send out this fantastic growth 1 foot below where you've cut from, right? Right, so don't agonize over outward facing buds, 45-degree angles. Follow the pruning guidelines, but like I said, don't agonize over them. All right, yes, there's a question.
You said the rose heals itself when you cut. Is it helpful to seal those cuts with something?
Okay, so the question in the room was, should we be sealing the rose cuts that we make with something? Does the rose heal itself or does it need help? And the answer to that is, once upon a time, it was thought that it would be good to put Elmer's glue. And you can still do that. It seals the cut surface. But what people have found is that you don't need to. So here's what I would say. Roses are growing in your garden just fine. You don't have disease to worry about. You don't need to do any extra sealing. If you find you have things like cane borers, right, where you have these little, I think they're beetles, these insects, they lay the eggs in the cane, in the pith of the cane, and the larvae bore themselves down, and you basically, start losing that cane. If you have cane borers in your area, absolutely go ahead and seal them, right? So again, everything, it depends on your situation. And there are parts of the country where they have cane borers and they have to do this. Bay Area, maybe not so much. Your area, maybe, right? So see what your rose is doing. Okay, so what to prune, and as I said, as importantly, what not to prune. So this is the section. If you find yourself nervous about pruning, wondering, what canes should I prune? How much should I prune? All of those questions that come into mind, this is the section that you want to be paying attention to, right? So we'll use a shrub rose as an example because that's the most common type of rose that we grow, right? The typical either vase-shaped, some more narrower than others, some a little bit broader than others, but essentially a vase-shaped rose bush is what we're going to be looking at to prune. So what I like to do is before, rushing in with pruners and start, just chopping away, I like to stand back and I like to observe the rose. How big did it get? When I last pruned it, how much did I prune? How much did it grow in the season? Has it got too big for its base? How much do I need to cut back, right? How much should I be cutting back? So that's what you want to determine first is how much do you plan to cut that rose back by? Now, your plans could change as you start cutting, but as you start, how much do you want to cut it back by? Yes,
Is
question.
there any concern about like how healthy it looks? Like, are there sometimes that you just want to cut it back because it looks, well, our gardener sometimes just cuts way, 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 way back.
Okay, so the question in the room, do we want to be concerned about how healthy the rose is before, we start cutting? Gardeners, and by gardeners, I think you're referring to the mow blow guys,
Yeah.
right? So, they cut things right back. So absolutely, we do want to be looking at the rows, and I've got a slide on that under the section, what not to prune. So if you just hold that thought, but it's a very, very important point. You should be thinking about, do I need to even prune the rows? Okay, but for the moment, assume that, we are going to be pruning this particular rows. So determine how much you're going to reduce the plant height by. And while you're doing this, recall why we prune. Anybody? Why do we prune?
For health and for the size of the space that it's in.
For the size of the space. Health? Maybe not. We found that in California, all those roses all growing for what, hundreds of years by themselves, didn't require any pruning, right? For size, for aesthetics, right? So that's what you want to be looking at. I have this garden bed, the rose must fit in this space. It got a little bit bigger than it should have got. I need to prune it down a bit, okay? So as a first pass, remove some top growth, and remove that top growth maybe less than half or around half of what your intended final height is going to be for pruning. And as you do that, also remove leaves, especially if, they're brown, getting disease. But even if they're not, there are a couple of reasons why I like to remove the leaves. And removing the leaves can help the rose to go into some sort of dormancy, or at least slow down in growth. And I've also found that, and others have reported it too, that there's less disease when you remove the old leaves. Old leaves, roses on their old leaves will catch some sort of disease. And at this time of the year, you'll find roses that don't have any disease through the rest of the year. You'll see black spot right now. You'll see rust right now. And that's okay. In this season, when I see rose with some disease, I don't mind it. It's later on in the season that you want to be concerned about that. So it's a good practice, just remove the leaves. Now, you've got this mini bust of a rose. Am I going to tell you, go ahead and please remove every single leaf off that rose? No, right? So use your best judgment. What I like to do by removing the leaves, apart from trying to force dormancy and helping control disease, is really, I want to start seeing the shape of the rose bush. And so as you cut that first layer down and you remove the leaves, what you see in the schematic is what your rose should start looking like. Okay. So here's what we have. So this is the rose in my garden, Julia Child. On the left is the rose. I've removed a little bit of the top growth. So because, when I took the picture first with all the leaves, I'm like, you just see a round ball. You can't really see anything. So I've sort of done a little bit of removing of the leaves. And then on the right, I've done that first pass. So what you can't see in the picture is, so the rose on the left, before I pruned it down, was about 5 feet in height. And on the right, I've taken it down by about 10 inches or so. And my final height isn't going to be too much lower. So I don't prune this rose down too much, because the window that you see on that wall, that's my kitchen window. I like to see the rose flowering from the window. So I don't prune it down too much, but it has so many small, thin canes. For those of you who are in the room, before you leave, take a look at Julia Child in the rose garden, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Lot of crisscrossing, heavily thorned canes. And this is a rose that I actually thin out in summer because it gets so dense. So this is after a pretty harsh, removal of canes sometime in maybe July. But anyway, so what you see on the right, now compare it with the diagram and you begin to see some sort of similarities, right? That's what you want to start getting at. Like, I want to see the shape of the rose. Now you can start figuring out like how you need to prune. Yes, the question in the room.
Does everything, all the principles you're sharing with us today also apply to rose trees?
Yes, so good question. So what about rose trees? So I had a whole bunch of slides on pruning climbing roses and rose trees, and I can talk and talk and talk. And Susan reminded me that this presentation, we have a deadline, so a hard stop. So I have in an appendix slide or slide somewhere, I have links to past presentations where I've talked more about pruning climbers, pruning tree roses. And we also have a presentation given previously by a gentleman named Stu Dalton, who is a past president of the Peninsula Rose Society, and he did an excellent presentation as well. All the recordings are there. So I'll encourage you, if you have like climbers, tree roses, to kind of look at those presentations. However, making the cut, things like that pretty much remain the same. There are some principles that you follow definitely that are different, but for rose trees, it's kind of the same. Climbers a little bit different. All right, so yeah, so you've got your rose beginning to emerge. You're getting an idea of what it looks like. All right, so what to prune? So the first thing, and that's an easy one, it's easy to remember to think of the 3 Ds. You want to remove damaged, diseased, and dead canes and stems. Okay, that's easy. You want to remove twiggy growth that's less than a pencil size in diameter. Those are called thinning cuts. And those are the ones marked with the yellow bar. So that's where you'd make the thinning cuts. You're removing all of that spindly twiggy growth. I will say here that, so I live in Foster City, where it can get really windy. And I have roses in a really exposed part of the yard, and those I never remove that spindly growth, because somehow those spindly growth, those twigs, sort of support the rose, and they stand firmer in the winds. And the years that I have removed all the spindly growth, the roses didn't fare that well. So just a thought to remember. Yes, a question in the room.
The opposite end of the spectrum. What about those big, super thick, I call them renegade?
Yes.
That I just feel like it's taking all of the energy from everything else. Do you cut those back or do you just let it go?
All right. So the question was, what about those thick, she likes to call them renegade canes, and that's an excellent word. You have this rose bush, and suddenly you'll see the, wayward cane, thick and longer than the rest. What do you do with those? That's a loaded question. And let's talk about that. Remind me in the question and answers, because there can be several things that are happening there. But I think that's important to talk about. So just remind me. Okay. The cuts in blue are to the thicker canes, not the renegade canes, just the normal thick canes of the rose, where you're reducing the plant height, right? So those are the heading cuts, and they're marked in blue. And as you are doing this, the heading cuts, the thinning cuts, take your time, right? Understand the rose, listen to what it's trying to tell you. It will tell you things. Make multiple passes as you need to. And the general guideline is in the Bay Area, in our mild climate, remove 1/3 or less of healthy wood through both the thinning cuts and heading cuts. Now, this might come as a surprise, especially when you ask the question, the Moblo guys, prune the life out of those roses down to 6 inches. The roses bounce back, right? Yeah. So what that tells you really is, and I've got this on a slide, we live in a climate where you can do both, and the roses will be just fine. Why do we recommend in a mild climate like ours to just prune lightly? Because you don't have to prune more unless you're controlling size, right? So once you've made that determination about size, that's fine. But otherwise, you don't need to prune more. If you don't need to prune, why do it? My gardening philosophy, right? All right. So here's what we got. This is what we started with on the left. The 1/3 or less pruning is what's recommended. And I like every 3 to 5 years, depending on the rose, to come in and just do a deeper pruning. I don't know, it just makes me feel better. But no, right? Some of the roses are just so vigorous, they get just like way too many canes and you've got this bramble of a mess. Clean them out, right? So a little bit deeper pruning every 3 to 5 years. You don't need to. Sometimes it's good for the soul. All right, okay. So what not to prune? You said something interesting. The renegade canes taking energy away from the other canes. Rose canes actually store energy in those canes. Okay, so I like to say, be judicious with your pruning, especially if you have a little bit weak grower of a rose, or if it's a young rose. I would say don't prune at all. You don't need to prune. Let that thing get a chance to grow. Okay. Now, in the rose garden where we prune severely, we do, you would say, Susan, we do more on the heavy side of pruning, right? Because we've got to fit the roses in their space. We've got a few roses that we've started to mark with flags that say do not prune. And that's because over the years, the extensive pruning, those roses have lost their vigor. They don't have a chance. Maybe they're roses that, don't tend to put up a lot of new canes. And we keep cutting the heck out of all the canes that the poor thing has been pushing up, right? So some roses, you just don't want to prune at all. Just a light trim at this time of the year, remove the leaves, get a look at the plant, just, help with the disease part of it. And that should be all. Don't feel bad. That's the right thing for that rose. Okay. Yes.
When you remove the leaves, do you just cut them to the cane?
So the question was, when I remove the leaves, what do I do? Do I cut them to the cane? Pretty much. So you'll find that some roses, literally you just have to blow on them and the leaf will fall off, gentle tug, the leaf comes off. And some, they hold on to their leaves. And those, I'll take the pruners, or I even like, the garden scissors. That's even easier to go in and use those. It doesn't matter. The stubs can be left on, it doesn't matter. Okay, and then the one that baffled me for several years, which I used to read in, the majority of the rose books, remove all but 3 to 5 canes on the rose. I'm being generous and I added 5 because just the thought of saying 3 made me so nervous. Remove all but 3 canes on the rose bush? Why? Hey, I don't know about you, but I'm really greedy for flowers. And if I've got a rose that has 7 canes that give me flowers, I'll take them, right? I'm not cutting back to 3. So I don't know. I think, again, there are climates where you might want to do that. The Bay Area is not one of them. Okay, life happens. You missed a year, no pruning done. Doesn't matter. The roses are going to be just fine. In fact, I got into this phase where I didn't prune my roses for 5+ years. There was this study done in England. It's a decade-long study where they had one section of several roses that they planted that were pruned in the traditional method. And then they had another section where the roses were pruned with hedge shears. And then they had a third section where the roses were, you know, willy-nilly, lightly pruned, just like whatever my method, right? Whatever. And then for a decade, they tracked how the rose performed every single year after that particular method of pruning, right? Properly, or what's considered proper, willy-nilly hedge shears. And they found that the roses, all of them, flowered exactly the same. The rose that was pruned very carefully didn't flower any more than the ones that were trimmed with the hedge clippers, or the ones that were just done willy-nilly, right? To me, that was eye-opening. Now, there's a person who, I don't know if any of you heard of the Vintage Gardens, a nursery in Sebastopol. It's closed now, but they offered old roses, tea roses, many different varieties of hard to find roses. And the owner, Greg Lowry, he talked about this study, and he said something that was very interesting. They missed one thing. And I think only the rose rustlers in California, those who know about the roses growing in the old cemeteries, would have thought of this. He said, where's the control group where they didn't prune the roses at all? Right? And guess what? I think those roses would have been elbowing each other for space, but they would have been flowering just the same. Right. So yeah, if you miss a year or two or more, don't worry. That rose might grow a little bit bigger than what you had intended for its area, but it will flower. It'll do fine. Now, exception, once flowering roses, you do not want to prune in winter. They form buds on the previous season's growth. So if you winter prune, you're going to remove all the buds and you're not going to get any flowers. So it's not really that, you know, I mean, it's more because you don't want to lose the flowers. Nothing's going to happen to the rose. You prune, it'll still survive. You'll just not get flowers that season. So if you have a rose that you prune and it never flowers, try not pruning that year. I think I told you before we started, right? There's someone in the room who before the presentation got started, she told me that she has this rose and it doesn't flower too much. And I said, try not pruning it this year. And she's going to send me an email later on in the year to tell me if it flowered or not. Yeah. All right. So, and then, you know, what I've mentioned previously for roses in the Bay Area, just consider a moderate pruning because that's all you really need to do. So if you're not fitting the rose into a space, don't worry too much about pruning. All right. So with that, we will do a little bit of a demo. I will actually bring a potted rose up here and I'll do some pruning. I'll show you a couple of things, but I wanted to show you on this slide. So the rose that I pruned, actually I pruned this yesterday and took pictures. Obviously this is the pictures of them flowering are from, you know, earlier this year in April. So this rose is Julia Child. The middle picture shows not quite in peak bloom because somehow almost always miss taking pictures of my roses in peak bloom. I don't know if that happens to any of you. But I used this picture instead of showing you the head-on, the same angle as where the pruning picture is from. That's where it flowers. That's the angle. But I wanted to show you this angle because I wanted to show you how I've pruned this rose. And the left side picture doesn't show it yet because I haven't got to that part of the pruning. Do you see the angle from right to left going down? And you know why that is? That's because the sun comes from the left side. And I want the rose to get all of the sun that it can. So I leave the further canes a little higher than the front canes. So everything gets a good amount of sun. Okay. So just something to think of. Okay. All right. Oh, yes, the demo. Okay. So I have this potted rose. It is an iceberg rose. It's called, thank you, Susan. It's called brilliant pink iceberg. So any of you familiar with iceberg roses? They're very common here. Profuse bloomer, as the name would suggest, they're white roses, but rose has sported, that is, it's mutated, and the rose flower color is pink. And it's called brilliant pink iceberg. We have it in the garden, in our public garden. One of our nicer roses, would you say, Susan? All right. So how does one go on? How does one begin? So I'll put on my gloves. I'll grab my pruners. And before I do that, let me show everybody, plus everyone in the audience. Oh, were there some questions, Kevin? No? Okay, great. So, all right. So this is, I would say, a youngish rose. So if this were in my garden, what do you think I might be doing? Probably removing leaves, cutting back maybe just a little bit. Remember I said the trimming, and that would be it for the year. But what I want to show you today using this rose as an example is a few of the cuts that I would make and few of the cleanup tasks that I would do. So it's not unusual this time of the year. You can see maybe not so much I was trying to show the base of the plant. There are, dead leaves, some twigs, that kind of thing. So you want to go in and you want to, make sure that that's all cleared out. There are pips on the rose. So someone asked me when they came in what these orange thingies were. And I'll cut one and show the people on Zoom and the audience. So does everyone see that? So that is the fruit of the rose, called a rose hip. And at this time of the year, it's not unusual for roses to have that, especially if you haven't done deadheading and things like that. So you haven't cut off the old blooms. So one of the first things that I like to do, I personally like to remove the hips. You'll find a lot of the East Coast people, other parts of the world, they leave the hips on for winter because the hips feed the birds. I have a lot of birds in my garden and I've never, ever seen them go for the rose hips. However, the squirrels do. And the squirrels and I, we've got this little bit of a thing going where I don't really like them in the garden. They like my garden, they like my roses, they like my other plants. Anyway, so I like to keep the rows free of all the hips. And you simply go in and you just cut them off. So that's all you do. Just, oops. I'm not showing people on the thing. So you just go in and you cut out all of the hips. All right, now I'm looking at the rows. It's got, and I can just tell you because I'm not able to kind of show you via the camera. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost like my hand, canes that aren't very big. So they've been pruned down probably when the rose was potted to sell. They've been pruned down to about 5 inches, some 3 inches, some even less. And then from those thicker canes that are about 1/2 inch in diameter, maybe more, are these small, thin, spindly growth. Okay, and I know this rose, this is pretty much what it does. It sends out a lot of this spindly growth. It's also a rose that you can do a lot to it and it will survive. They're used as landscape roses in many parts of California, white roses, especially Southern California. All right, so what am I going to do? So probably maybe even things out, would you say, right? So we've got this little bit of a wayward cane. And how about we get it down? Let me twist the camera so that people can see on Zoom. So this is the cane that I'm talking about. And it's about 10 to 12 inches. And let's go for maybe half. And here is at this point where the leaf is a growth bud. Okay, and the growth bud is pointing this way, right? It's okay. On this side, the one behind it, it's pointing this way. And you know what? I think either way, both would be good, but I'm going to use my less is more, and I'm going to go with the higher one. And I've got my pruners. Here we go. Let's have the cutting blade below, like it says, and 1/4 inch. Okay, I'm going to remove the sleeve so people can see what I'm doing. So 1/4 inch. Above the bud eye, I'm going to cut. Okay, clean cut. This is the cutoff part. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to put it in the bin. Right? All right. So what did I actually cut? So I'm actually going to cut below so that I can show you. I want to show everyone this cut. Where is my camera? You see? Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to peel this back. Can you see the butter? Let's see. You see it? That little thing sticking out. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay. It's hidden underneath that leaf. Yeah, you could pass it around. All right. So, like I said, I really like to remove leaves, but wouldn't make sense for me to have you all sit here on a nice Sunday afternoon while I pick leaves off this plant. But you know what? Literally, this is what, oh, this is a good one. Okay. Okay, I'm going to sacrifice growth here to now show you what is a growth bud, because this rose has already decided where it wants to send up this. Okay, I've got the leaf. You see the growth bud? There we go. Look at how much bigger that is. So, this rose probably would have flowered on that much earlier than April. Yeah. All right, okay, so if you've noticed, I've already got rid of those wayward, well, what we would think wayward canes, right? I've kind of made the bush a little bit more equal. I'm going to continue doing that and remove diseased old leaves. So this is just an old leaf, right? The rose has pushed out these leaves back in February, March. These leaves are old now, right? It would want to shed them anyway. So, okay, then you've got the browns. Okay, so here we go. Remember the 3 Ds? Anybody? Disease, damaged, right? Dead. And we've got maybe something fell on this cane, maybe, you know, when we got it from the nursery, put it in the car, you know, just the cane hit against it, it died. We want to remove all that. We prune for aesthetic. How about getting rid of this old stuff, right? And this is the time, especially with our rain, at least we're getting something again this year, that's good. The roses, many of your roses will still have blooms, and the rain, with the rains, they're going to get decayed and brown, right? Cut them off, right? At this time of the year, again, nothing to worry about. So I'm just removing all those brown decaying bits. Okay, and what I would really want to do, even though this is a young rose and I said I don't want to prune it down too much, is I want to get rid of this growth in the center, which is just really spindly. And so I'm going to go in there. And when you cut down, we talked about cutting down to the base. Someone had asked me a question, like, where would I, make the cut when you're removing an entire cane? You want to go right to the base. You don't worry about any slants. You cut flat to where the cane joins the other cane. And in the first pass, I couldn't get at it. I would continue, make space. This is where your pruning saw, for example, comes in handy, somewhere where you can get into a tight space. You want to remove all the crisscrossy cane. So you have these canes coming from the left of the plant all the way to the right of the plant through the interior. Yeah, you probably want to get rid of that. And that's, think of the, do not prune more than 1/3 of even the thinning cuts. Don't make thinning cuts more than 1/3. And that's the kind of stuff that you want to reserve for, right? Open up the interior of the plant so that you get good air circulation. And that's, we talked about like health of the plant, and it's just something in our gardens where, we've got maybe way too many roses than we should. They're a little tightly packed, or you've got other plants and the roses, don't just get enough fresh air going through them. that's something that you want to think about. So pruning, maybe that's a good one for health. So yeah, I would continue just reaching in. Found one more, dead cane that kind of fell apart as I took it out. Lots of these dead cane, tiny twigs. Some more spindly growth. And some lot of hips. So this rose has flowered quite a bit. And so some more of that. How about I do it from this side so people can see? There we go. So here's the rose hip. Let me cut off that branch so you can see it better. Here's the rose hip. This is the one. And what I'm doing is I'm following the cane all the way down to where it meets another stem. And I'm putting my pruner right against it and making a flat, straight cut. And this is what I've got. Okay. So we've thinned out already quite a bit. There's no right, there's no wrong. Just feel comfortable. Okay, and now as I've cut further in, I found something. I'm not sure. Okay, let me prune it off and then I can show you. Here is something that has died back. So I don't know if it appears in the camera okay. You can see it's brown up to here, and then there's a little bit of yellow, and then there's the green. This cane is dying back. So a cut was made here, and it's died back. So Susan, you can pass this around as well. Let me see if I can go closer. Ah, there, better. So you can see it now. Do you see the green portion at the bottom here? And this is brown. This is dying back. It's yellow, that's still dying, and that's the green part that hasn't died back yet. So that's typically what dieback looks like.
How far back do you cut it? Up to the green?
I cut it actually, in this case, there was just very little green before it hit the stem that it was attached to, that it was growing on. So I cut it all the way back to there because most likely it would get all the way back to there. And so that's a good question. Someone in the room asked, how far back did I cut it? And you typically want to cut a dying cane back to where there is a branching, because most likely that's where the cane is going to go back to anyway. And then at the branching point is where it's likely to stop dying back. So, just go ahead and cut to that point. All right. Susan, how are we doing on time?
We gotta get started.
We got to get started. Okay. So, yeah, that's what I would be doing. I would at this point, and I don't know if you remember where we started, but we had things like on top. I've already thinned stuff out. At this point, I wouldn't be doing too much more on this rose. I'd be just removing leaves. Maybe a few twigs inside once I remove the leaves, and that's about it. Okay. So let's move this and do this really quickly. This is not so much, it's a baby rose, but it's a miniature rose. How many people will prune this? Right? So maybe before this presentation, you'd have gone for it. after this presentation, I would hope you'd say, no, poor little thing, I'm not going to cut you down, okay? All right. So I just have, sorry, Susan. All right. Thank you. All right, so now let's my final thoughts. So I really believe that we are so lucky to be living here in the Bay Area in a climate in which roses just seem to thrive. That you cannot really make a mistake, right? They're very resilient in our climate. They will bounce back from whatever we do to them. But you know, it doesn't mean you take a poor little rose like this, and every year you keep chopping it and chopping it. Yeah, it's after some time it's gonna say, hey, I'm giving up, right? But for the most part, take a regular size, good, healthy rose, good grower. You can't make a mistake with pruning. Okay. Now, remember again, roses don't need to be pruned. They don't require it. We prune to fit the rose in its space and for aesthetics. And there's a lot of great information on the web, right? I mean, just amazing, amazing stuff. But as we know with roses and gardening, location matters. So when you find something on the web, please make sure that it applies to our area, okay? It's really important. So just be careful what you pick up and listen to, watch, or read. And I think this is really what I'd like you to take away. Follow all the guidelines to rose care and rose growing and pruning, but don't agonize over the rules, right? Make it easy on yourself, make it easy on the rose. So with that, we'll do question and answers. This is about.
We probably need to get.
Is it right? We are way over time. Okay. So let's do this. I have one more slide. Right. And so instead of additional questions, how about questions? You can contact me at this email address. And like I said, all of the past recordings for more detailed pruning exercises and, you know, pruning other types of roses is on our webpage and on YouTube.
And you will get a copy of it.
And everyone will get a copy of these slides. Yeah. All right. So sorry if I really took too much time. All right, and thank you for those of you on Zoom. All right, okay.
Okay, thank you, Archana. Great presentation on how we can make our roses look glorious this next year. I remember going into the rose garden when 15, 20 years ago, they were cutting them way down. You know, it's nice that we're a little bit more gentle on our roses. So in a few days, everyone will be emailed a link to a recording of the presentation and the evaluation form. Any unanswered questions can be addressed at that time. We appreciate feedback on what worked and where we can improve. The January 13th pruning of the roses in Central Park may be postponed to January 20th. It may not be raining on Saturday, but the ground may be too wet and we don't want to compact the soil around the roses. Register for the pruning of the rose garden on the website to receive updates. Rose garden volunteers will be on hand to instruct beginners, dress warmly, and bring pruning shears and gloves. Please join us for future seminars and workshops. The free seminar on Sunday, February 4th will be all about growing microgreens. You will learn about the many varieties available, and it takes only 3 weeks to begin harvesting. Sign up for this program on our website, sanmateoarboretum.org/classes-events. Join the Arboretum Society and receive discounts on workshops a variety of nurseries, businesses on the peninsula, and get a 10% discount at the Arboretum Nursery. We also have a variety of volunteer opportunities from Greenhouse Nursery, Education Department, helping with the Zoom setups and more. And let us know if you're interested by completing the evaluation form for this program, or you can email us at info@sanmateoarboretum.org. A huge thank you again to Archana for to Kevin, our president, for handling the technical part of the program. And all of you for joining us today. The program is now finished. Thank you. Okay, guys.